As you can see, we have 4 viewports, each viewport showing off a different angle of the scene. This viewing method is known as orthographic projection, which is commonly found in drafting and 3D software packages. It's a term that dates back to the early hand-drawing drafting days. We have a top view, side view, front view, and main camera view. We can move through the viewports quite easily. First, make sure the viewport you want to edit is selected, and we can right mouse click to pan the view. And if we want to zoom out and in, we can use Control key and the right mouse button to zoom in and out. And we can also use the scroll button on our mouse. And if we go up to the top of the screen, we can see that we have these magnifying glasses that will also allow us to zoom in and out in our scene. We can also use some of these tools to frame selected area to allow us to draw out the area we want to show. And then we can also use some of these buttons next to it, depending on if we have objects on our scene. I'm going to go ahead and select our light and our camera. And if we go up to this button that's right next to our frame selected area, we have frame all and selected objects. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And this works automatically. If we have objects selected, it will automatically frame these objects in our viewports. And if we don't have anything selected at all, it will actually just frame all, which is our camera and our light right now. But if we had more objects in the scene, that would show up a little bit better. We also have the ability to change around our viewports. And we're going to go up to the upper right, and we can see this button. This is View Display Options. Go ahead and click on that, and it gives us a bunch of different viewports we can view. I could change this top view to the front view, side view, main camera view, or perspective view if I want to. And if we want more of a traditional orthographic projection view, what we can do is actually change the side view to the main camera view, and then our main camera view to the side view, which is also a little more similar to most other 3D software packages that are out there, which work with the actual orthographic projection, which is having the main camera view up at top, or a perspective view where we have the side view down in the lower right. And if we move our mouse over these division bars between our viewports, what we can actually do is go ahead and resize these viewports to however we want. And we could have our front view very small, side view a little stretched out, but a very large main camera view. So it really depends on how you're working and what the size of your object is and the type of scene you're working on. So you can just move these around and adjust your viewports to however it is that you feel most comfortable. We can operate the camera with several different methods. First way, which is a more common way of manipulating the camera, is located underneath the thumbnail preview on the right. What we can see is we have our rotate camera, and we have a move camera back and forth. We can also adjust the zoom of our camera right above that, and then our pan, so we can move our camera around. And I'm going to select our main camera view, and then go ahead and double click on this main camera view text, which is going to pull it up full screen. Now this will do this with any of our viewports, so we can double click on our side view, make that full view. We do with the top view, front view, or any of the other views, and that's to help you depending on what you're working on. If you're working on a scene where the top view is most important, especially with painting, when we're painting ecosystems, then of course our top view we would want to have full view so we can see everything that's going on maybe a little bit better. But I'm going to go back to our main camera view, double click on that, so we can see our options that we're editing for our camera a little bit easier. Another way we can manipulate our camera is with Numeric Tools. Let's go up to the middle bar up here, our measuring tab, and select our main camera. And we can edit our camera's position, scale, rotation, orientation, and all these different options throughout this panel. So if we want a little more precise editing, we can use these options. Otherwise, we can go back to our 4 viewports and actually select our camera and move it around in our viewports the same way we'd move around any other object, depending on if it's local, parent, global, or camera, which we cover under the object manipulation chapter. Now I'm going to deselect our camera, and all we really have to do is select in the gray area away from our camera, or we can also do that in our layers panel down here. But one thing we can actually do is drag this bar out that's on the right, and we can move this around however we want. The more we move it out to the left, you'll see that the main camera view or our thumbnail preview gets larger, which can be very helpful when you're working with scenes where some of that detail we need to be able to see in our preview. And if we pull it out a little bit farther, you'll see that our thumbnail preview goes up to the right, and we have our measuring tabs and option tabs over here on the next to it. And then, of course, all of our other tabs that we have on the bottom a little bit larger. So if we're working with large amounts of layers, this is very helpful. And I'm going to move this back, and we're going to take a look at a little bit more about our thumbnail preview. If we right mouse click, you can see we have some more options. We can choose to turn on and off auto update. We can also adjust our preview quality, fast, standard, superior, and best. This is very helpful when you're working with soft shadows and different types of lighting effects. Certain things like that where the standard quality isn't going to give you a very good representation of what the scene is actually going to look like, because you do need higher render settings in order to render certain effects. So sometimes you do need to change this. We can also change this to high priority too, and that way this makes sure that the thumbnail preview will render before anything else renders in the scene or calculates in our scene, and that way we can keep up to date with exactly how our scene looks. If you come down to the bottom, you can see we have a couple of different tabs down here. We have our Objects tab, which is linked to all of our layers, and we have our Materials tab, and then our Library tab, and our Links tab. The Layers tab, what we can do is actually set up different layers. I'm going to go ahead and just pull this bar out so we can see this a little bit better. And we can create custom layers to turn on and off. And right now I've just gone ahead and locked this layer. You can see we get a little bit of a message. And that's because it's really the only layer in our scene. We have our main camera in it, our ground, and our sunlight. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. You can go down to the lower left, click New Layer, and now what we can do is add a few objects to that if we want. I'm just going to add a sphere and a cylinder. And now we have these in Layer 2. So what I can do is turn Layer 2, either lock it or turn it off. Turning it off, we don't see it at all in our scene, but that layer is still available. Turn it back on, and then we can make our edits, or of course we can lock this layer, and that way it's sort of grayed out in our scene, as we can see, almost as if transparency is turned on. But we cannot make any edits to these objects at all. We cannot select them or move them, but they are still in our scene. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on. So it can be very, very helpful when you're isolating certain sections of your objects, certain groups, and Layers tab is very, very helpful in that method. We can also change this around just a little bit more. If we click on our arrow, we can also sort this by names, by sizes, and by types. So it really depends on what exactly it is you're working on, because certain views can be more helpful depending on the scene that you're working on or the part of the scene that you're working on, to give you a little more perspective on certain areas and different types of objects and their relations to each other. So it's pretty helpful. I'm going to change this back to our layers. And our next tab is our Materials tab, which will show us all of our materials that are in the scene. So if I go ahead and change this material, I'm going to go ahead up to here and just load a quick preset material. You can see that that orange rock we just added is now part of our standard materials in our Materials tab. We also have our library, which is going to show our ecosystems that we have in our scene and our master objects. And of course, our last tab is our links. Now this is going to show any relations between objects, whether it be with texture maps or with the actual objects linking to each other, parents, and that'll be covered a little bit later in the linking chapter.